and welcome to the Future of Journalism, a Decoder dialogue brought to you by News Decoder. I'm Maria Krasinski. I'm the managing director at News Decoder, coming to you from our home base in Paris, France. And for those of you joining us for the first time, News Decoder is a nonprofit news site and journalism education platform that helps young people around the world, some of whom you'll meet tonight, be informed, responsible media consumers and producers, and effective global citizens. And central to our mission is featuring youth voices side by side with our experienced journalists and experts to discuss and debate the issues of the day. And tonight's conversation is part of that effort and part of our fall campaign, which is focused on the future of journalism, where we're looking at how the news media industry has continually adapted to keep pace with changes in society, technology, audience, distribution, some of which we'll get into in our conversation. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to our moderator, News Decoder's Educational News Director, Marcy Burstener.
Hi, I'm Marcy Burstener, and I'm speaking from Ireland. I'm originally from a place called Yonkers, New York, and I work with both journalists and student journalists at News Decoder. And in my other life, I have been a journalist for many years and a teacher of journalism, and that's my background. The way things are going to work here is we are going to I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves, and then we are going to have a little poll that's going to ask you, the audience, how you feel about the future of journalism. Then the students are going to be asking our journalists some questions, and we might have a little bit of back and forth. One thing to know as a member of the audience, if you have a question, we would love to hear it. Just pop it into the Q&A. And now I'm going to have everyone just introduce themselves. Anais?
Yeah, hi, hello everybody. I'm Anais, connecting from Romania. I'm really glad that I could join and I could participate in this great opportunity and great webinar.
Great. And Joshua?
Hi everyone, my name is Joshua. I'm currently in Zaragoza in Spain, although I'm originally from good old New York, New York.
Great. Isabella?
Hey everyone, my name is Isabella. I'm from Colombia. I'm from a small town called Monteria, but I'm now in Bogota. And yeah, I'm so glad I have this opportunity.
Great. And Aoife?
Hi everyone, my name is Aoife. I'm studying abroad in Viterbo, Italy right now, and I'm originally from Ridgefield, Connecticut.
Great. Now we're going to introduce our journalists. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Heneghan. I'm from New York, and I spent 40 years at Reuters, which probably none of you will do, 40 years at one company. My last job for the last 14 years was as religion editor for Reuters, but before that I was a correspondent in Europe and Asia, all around.
Great.
So I'm retired. So.
And Norma?
Hi, my name is Norma Hilton. I'm currently an investigative journalist and an independent journalist. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. I've covered everything from K-pop to murder-suicides, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
And finally, Enrique.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. I'm Enrique Shore. I'm originally from Argentina, where I joined Reuters a long time ago. And I stayed with that company for like 30 years. I worked in most of Latin America and Europe. I was based in Spain for a long time, and now I left like 10 years ago. I am living in New York, and anyway, I'm a photojournalist, so my beat is visuals.
Great. Now we have a little bit of an audience engagement poll. So we'd like everyone in the audience to quickly tell us, how do you see the future of journalism? Do you see it trending positively, trending negatively, or are you not sure? And do we have some results?
Indeed, we have 50% trending negatively, 22% trending positively, and 28% are not sure.
Oh, so the feeling is negative in general. So we're going to see if through our panel discussions, we're going to end on that negative note or that positive note. Although there's a quite a high not sure. Okay, so now we're going to jump in to our journalist introduction. So I'm going to ask Tom, what do you think?
What do I think? Since I'm a born optimist, I have to think that I have to say something positive. I think that I see a lot of negative things now, but I don't want to say that that means that there's no future in journalism. I think writing, being able to write clearly and to explain yourself is good, no matter what form that takes, whether you work as a classical journalist, whether you work in a company, in a bank. There'll always be a space for people who can express themselves well, can write clearly, and so whatever you learn will be a positive thing. As for trends right now, I think first of all, the job market is more and more unclear because there are more and more organizations that have been closed down, like newspapers in the States have closed down big time. But at the same time, there are more things online, social media, different websites. News Decoder, for example, is online. There's an imbalance there, though, and that in that before you seem to have more established companies and they would go along. Reuters, for example, seemed to be one of those old established companies from the time I joined in 1977 till about the mid 90s. And then suddenly it began to start to change. And luckily I wasn't in the front row of any of the changes, and I didn't have to get involved with that. In terms of certain things that have popped up even fairly recently, like artificial intelligence, and that came up in a lot of the questions. I think that there will be a lot more emphasis on the journalist checking things again and again and again. I don't know how many times I was able to just sit in my office. Now, this is for a news agency, so you want to be quick and you want to take things as soon as they appear. And if you would see, for example, I'm in Paris. Back when I was doing political news and I'd see like President Sarkozy appear on TV, I would know him, I would have seen him, and nobody could make deep fakes at the time. So if Sarkozy, if an established news channel said, here, now we have an interview with Sarkozy, and they catch him going into some place or whatever, you could take what he said and you could use it as a quote. Now you have to check. Now you have to be slower and take some time out because there's a lot of fakes that are going around. And I think that that'll become, quick checking is going to become more and more important. And every news organization is going to have that, I think. But at the same time, artificial intelligence can make your research a lot easier. Now, you'll have to know how to use it. For example, just right now, I use Wikipedia. I never quote Wikipedia, but if there's something that I have to research, that's where I begin. That's where I begin to find things if I don't know anything about it. And then I go to the real sources, and you'll have to find out that come up in the questions, how do you find out what's a good source and what's not? That is a question of experience. There's no way around it. You just have to find out who you trust based on what they have done in the past. And pretty soon, it's going to be very hard, even with what seem to be established people. You don't know whether it's a fake. You have to check and see. You also have to, if it's a question of skills, you have to know enough about what you're talking about. I know lots of people, like when I was teaching journalism, very often you'd hear they just learned skills, journalistic skills. They didn't learn anything, they didn't study any history or political science or philosophy or whatever that would give them a bit more knowledge about what they're going to be confronted with. Here, they're just learning the how. And I say, you need more context. So take that for beginners.
Okay. Okay, great. Norma, what do you think?
I agree with Tom on the point of sort of that we're already starting to move away from legacy organizations like Reuters and Associated Press and things like that into more sort of niche publications that focus on specific topics like the environment or tech. And that's been happening for a couple of years now, and I think it'll continue to happen. I think the other thing that I've noticed is that there's a diversification of content and the way we're producing content. So I found that a lot of journalists are now producing maybe first-person essays or features where they are collaborating with the people they're interviewing, which was not a thing at all a couple years ago. I'm also noticing that particularly within investigative journalism, which is my sort of expertise, that people are turning to open source investigative techniques where they're looking to social media, trying to see whether videos and photographs that have been uploaded by citizen journalists are real, and whether they're from the day and date and the place that they say they are from, in order to make sort of the stories more comprehensive and more detailed. It requires a lot of fact checking, but it's something that's been happening for a couple years, and I think will continue to happen. I also think that I'm not sure exactly about the exact number of elections, but next year there's going to be a lot of elections around the world, both general and state, and all sorts of other elections. And I think journalism is sort of the last line of defense between democracy and authoritarianism, and we're going to need it now more than ever.
Good. And Enrique, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with most of what has been said. I think there are many approaches. One very important aspect that we need to take into account is the technological advances that in the last, particularly in the last couple of decades, but now in a very geometrical way. I mean, it's exponential way that has changed everything. It has changed the speed of transmissions. Like I remember when I joined Reuters 40 years ago, Reuters had the privilege of having the most advanced communication system in the world in private hands, and that was the advantage, the fact that they could transmit the news faster and securely. And now, everybody or anybody could transmit. That can be a broadcaster could do a live broadcast of whatever is happening in the world, and without even intermediate. You could post it in your own site, or you could give it to anybody, and this is like an immediate effect. Now that also generates an amazing amount of noise. So there is a lot of information floating around, and much more than what anybody can decode. That's the reason you have used Decoder. You have a way of trying to make sense of all that noise and explain what really is happening. And for that, you also need what Tom very wisely mentioned, that you need to have certain knowledge of what you are talking about. It's not just transmitting a fact. Also, of course, with the technological changes, there was an advance of the power of distorting things, the power of generating content that may look real, and it may not be real. So the importance of the source is more relevant than ever in that sense. So it is, I think, in that sense, I think, and what Norma also said, I mean, the need for a reputable source of information is going to be more and more important, actually. Now, that said, the collapse of that traditional media, for economic reasons as well, like particularly the newspaper industry, but every aspect of media is affected, means that it's very hard to make a living out of that. So yes, you need to be informed, you need to be technologically up to date, you need to have a very ethical position and very solid grounds to establish that what you are saying or what you're reporting is true and is sound. But you also need to, be able to go to the supermarket and buy your groceries every day and pay your rent, and that's an equation that is not easy to do. It's because staff positions are less and less available, and making a living independently is growingly difficult. So it's a balancing act that is I don't know. I don't have an answer. So I totally see the need for solid journalism. How is that going to be sustainable? I don't know. I don't hear you. I don't know if it's me or you.
Right.
Yeah.
We had a little mini hurricane here in Ireland. I turned my mute on to not disturb you guys, but it's over. So one of the issues is kind of this tension between the need for journalism, which many people still see, and whether we can pay for it. But let's get to a question. The first question is about new technology, and I think, Anais, you've got a question.
Yeah, I have a question to Tom. So how is the rise of digital platforms impacting traditional journalism? How are you combating the challenges that arise with the new technologies, such as AI-generated content being used in journalism?
Well, first of all, I think that with AI content, there's already an emphasis on sourcing and improving the sourcing you've seen for the past, I don't know, at least 10 years, there've been fact checkers at big newspapers, and some of them, do quite a job about fact checking. I think that's going to become more important, that there will be certain teams or even departments that will check to see, check the timestamps, check the geolocation information and things like that. That's going to come up more and more. What artificial intelligence takes away may actually create some other jobs, and I would expect that to happen in the Department of Fact Checking and things. With other things, though, look at, for example, in a news agency, because that's all I ever worked in was news agencies. Now I'm a freelancer, but it's just occasional. In the news agency, there used to be a lot of jobs where a highly skilled person ended up simply putting out like the Wall Street closing price, and that had to go to a person of a certain level of responsibility because you had to get it right and you had to win the competition. Now all of that's done automatically. In fact, a lot of things, the snap will come off automatically, that's taken from the stock market itself. Then you'd get a small story, 2 or 3 paragraphs with all the numbers simply slotted in. All that happens automatically. And you can have a formulaic sort of story after that will still be done automatically. That means that the economics desk doesn't have to waste that much time just putting out these numbers. They can do other things. So, there'll be a shift of waiting within an office of what you're actually doing. I also think that artificial intelligence, it'll be a bit like Wikipedia. You can start very quickly and get a whole array of sources. Then it's up to you to know better what sources you should follow then, what looks interesting. But you would have at your fingertips a lot more information than we used to have. I mean, when I started, we had a library. You had to call up the library and say, can you give me the clips about this or that? And it would take about 15, 20 minutes for the actual information to be sent up with a courier from downstairs in the library to upstairs to the newsroom, where we still worked with typewriters. Those days are gone. Thank God they're gone.
So in one sense, the technological advances are improving things and not necessarily ruining them.
Yeah, so I definitely think that. Whether it can balance it out is another question. I think Enrique made a good point about simply money. When we had the old legacy groups, I would, for example, if I traveled someplace, I had a life insurance policy that was paid by Reuters. I had editors behind me. There was a whole setup of support. I noticed, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, in the aughts, there were a lot of American freelancers who went off. They bought themselves a video camera, they did a few things, and they just went. One poor guy was captured by Islamic State in Iraq and was killed. And he had nothing behind him. I think there's going to be more and more of that. And I find that very worrying. But again, I don't know what the answer is to that. Certainly the answer isn't to go back to the old way, because companies have decided, no, that's too expensive. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway.
So the next question we have has to do with social media and citizen journalism. And I think, Joshua, you've got the question.
Yeah, I actually wanted to touch on one thing that any three journalists can ask, but I'm just curious because one of the new forms of, I mean, it's not really journalism, it's more of, I mean, it's completely artificial intelligence, but there's a form of journalism where people are recreating things using AI generated content, as in like they can make themselves look like somebody else. And so you can have, I've seen videos that have been obviously debunked, but have people who will make themselves look like Joe Biden and say something that he absolutely did not say, or they'll change something using artificial intelligence to make it look like something happened that didn't actually happen. And I think, one of the scariest things about social media is as soon as something's in social media, it spreads like wildfire. There's no way to stop it. And so, I'm curious as journalists, how do you think that might change things? That journalists might start having to actually start saying that no, that was not true, that Joe Biden didn't ever say something like that, or no, that's a fake video that never actually happened, something like that, because I think that could be really scary. I don't know.
Let's throw that to Norma, because Norma, you've had some experience with fact checking.
Sure, yeah. So because I worked for a long time, for most of my career as an investigative journalist, fact checking was a big part of that work. To my understanding, and I agree with you, Joshua, that like deepfakes and things like that, that AI that can change voices and make people sound like they're saying something they haven't, is making our jobs harder, but it's also requiring us to be more vigilant and I think better journalists in the process. We're learning new skills in order to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and making sure that the truth is out there. It's a hard process, though, I will say. Like, even I have trouble with it because I don't come from a tech background. I don't come from a cybersecurity background, and these are all things that have happened quite recently. So, I mean, it certainly is changing the landscape, and I don't really know how it's going to change the future of journalism, but it certainly will have an impact.
Okay.
Thanks.
If I can just say one thing to that, I think, following on what you're saying, Norma, there would be people in a fact-checking department. You would have people who understand much more about the technology. They will have to. I think, in fact, all of us will have to learn more about the technology, but we can't be technology wizards about it. There will be people who can do things like geolocate a video or something like that. So you see that right away. You would hand that over to that person, and then they could do it for you. But at a certain point, you have to know enough about it to say. For example, you said if there was a deep fake where Biden said something which he obviously would never say, well, that you would notice right away. But it gets much more subtle. And, at some point you'd have to say, what do you do? I think, and I may be unpopular doing this, at a certain point, you just leave it. You cannot answer all those questions. You cannot say everything, pass a judgment whether something is true or false to everything. Some of the stuff is just going to be out there, and that's it. You just leave it because you don't have the bandwidth to do it. You stick to what you want to do, and at a certain point, you just leave the rest of it.
I think I'm going to throw this to Enrique, because Enrique, you're a photojournalist, and this has been a particular problem ever since Photoshop came out, of being able to discern between real photographs and fake photographs.
Indeed. Well, there is even before Photoshop. I mean, like, okay, I am a bit biased in the sense that I always work as a photographer, a press photographer, and the visuals always had that added layer of trust, in the sense that, okay, if you say, somebody said that, you could write something, and yeah, well, that's you write that somebody said so. Okay, if you have a lot of reputation that we could trust you, then we believe you, right? Now, if you see a picture, the old saying that a picture was worth 1,000 words comes from the fact that, okay, originally you see a picture, you believe in that picture, you immediately don't challenge that, and that has changed a lot in that. So let me can I share you a couple of things very quickly? Let me see if I can share my screen. So you see a penguin, and you know, that particular picture has like a little sign there that says content credentials. That's a new initiative that a lot of people, like maybe that was initiated by people like Adobe, which is the maker of Photoshop, and the New York Times and IBM, and a lot, like 2,000 companies are now doing this, which is a way of embedding information into the picture in as part of what is called the metadata. So that's details about the pictures that are not seeing visually, but a machine could read them and could authenticate the provenance of a particular image. So that let me stop that. Well, I have other things that I may show you later, but that is one initiative that some of these companies are trying to implement a standard. So you won't be able to detect a fake, but you will be able to detect a true picture that has not been manipulated, because all the information since a picture was captured and all the following modifications that have been done to the picture are registered in layers that are secured and are readable with special tools. So that is one technical solution that is being implemented now in order to detect or to somehow to certify the origin of a particular image. So, you know, it boils down to what to me is the main asset that we have as journalists, you know, which is credibility. So if you you know, if you say something, it's because you honestly are reporting something that is happening in front of you, and that is good with text or with pictures, with videos, with audio, and you know, now with the ability of the technology to change that in an extremely powerful way that is really not easy to detect, that you know, is more important than ever to have ways of you know, somehow confirming all that. Let me see if I can share one last thing for you with two. If let me share that. No,
We're seeing two images.
you're seeing two images.
Yes.
What?
One is looks like the Pope is wearing a overcoat.
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
one is of, it looks like Donald Trump being
Arrested. Yeah, exactly. Both pictures are fake. One is pretty obviously fake, the one of Trump. It's pretty obviously fake because this is a technology that is still not perfect. It's being like probably even months from now, it would be possible to do something like this even much more realistically, and you would not be able to distinguish that it is a fake. In this case, number one, you don't believe that situation. Number two, it is a bit of like a painting. No, it's not a perfect picture. Now, the one with the Pope wearing a coat is also a total fake, and it's a bit more believable, right? It's something that even I know people who had seen that and said, well, wow, you know, he was wearing a coat. And you know, it is this this is not going to stop. This is going to continue. What is going to also continue is the development of tools and mechanisms to detect these, which is something that is tricky, and it's going to be increasingly tricky. There are initiatives like that. I mean, you could go to, there is a site that is called Content Authenticity Initiative. You could look it up, and there's a lot of examples and a lot of cases, and you know, most media organizations throughout the world are implementing either that or similar methods to try to avoid the disaster that would be to publish some video or some pictures that would turn out to be totally fabricated, and which, you know, to a minor extent that has happened already several times, and it may happen again, you know, and that will destroy the credibility of that media. That's and so if you don't believe in what they are showing you, then, you know, why would you buy a paper or listen to you know, to a TV show? So that the main asset that you need to preserve is that credibility. Right. Now that is increasingly difficult from a technical point of view, but there are technical solutions that are being implemented. And what is totally imperative is to have a very strong ethical standpoint where you really believe that that is very important. You know, it's not the same to flip a picture or to put out something that is not true.
So it sounds like a technology in some ways is maybe used to combat some of the problems that we are seeing. Good. So we're going to move on to another question. I think this time I think we're still on the subject of social media. And Isabella, you've got a question.
Yes, my question is to Norma. So, as a journalist, how do you see the evolving relationship between reporters and their audience in an age of increasing interactivity and citizen journalism? What skills and approaches are necessary to engage and collaborate with the public effectively?
So to answer the first part of your question, I think right now there are two very vocal, publicly seen camps. So there's one camp that's very much like, we hate you and we don't believe a word you're saying. And that camp on the internet is quite loud, and they've made the job of journalists much harder. They've also required us, I think, to learn skills that we probably wouldn't have need to know before. And I think it's become increasingly important to know now, and that's fact-checking for sure. It started with President Trump's election in 2016, and it's continued on since then. I think the other camp, which is also incredibly vocal and can be toxic sometimes, is we don't really understand what's happening. Help us understand what's happening right now. And that camp of people, I think, approach journalism and the news with a very genuine desire to learn, but it sort of becomes this playing field of we're now going to pull journalists into identity politics and ideological debates. And so it becomes less and less about learning and more about furthering someone's agenda. So that's what I've observed personally. I do think a majority of people, and these people are probably not as vocal online for sure, are just engaging with news, trying to understand, what is happening in their local areas. Like, is there going to be a shutdown of the subway, or is there going to be like electricity problems? These are like very basic pieces of information that people turn to. And I think most people are like that. To answer the second part of your question, I think the skill most needed now is definitely fact checking. And I think that although it would be nice to be able to hand over a piece of information to a different department and ask them to look it over, even in pre-reporting stages, I've noticed that because our newsrooms are shrinking and there's fewer and fewer people, we are having to learn how to fact check. We are having to learn how to geolocate and do all of those things ourselves now, which is sometimes difficult because you're having to keep up with an industry and an environment that is moving quicker than you can probably adapt to it. So yeah, that's how I would describe it.
Okay. I think Joshua now has a question.
Yeah, this is a question to Tom, but I think the question I originally had, I think I'm gonna switch it a little bit because we already talked about kind of sources. I'm just curious, like, you're an experienced journalist, you've seen a lot of, journalists in the field. Does a journalist ever kind of cross the line? I've always been curious about this. I've seen journalists expose a lot of, do a lot of whistleblowing, things like that, and, other forms of exposure. Does that ever cross the line? Is there a point where they kind of lose that freedom of, journalism, freedom of speech?
You mean cross the line in that they spout
Like reveal too
evidence?
much, yeah. Like they put people's lives in danger, or they revealed government secrets, things like that.
There's several. You have several different things here. One is putting people's lives in danger. That sometimes happens when you don't want it at all, but it happens anyway. If you very often, I've only been in. I've never worked in an English-speaking country. I've always been in a country where either I spoke the language or I had needed a translator. You need a local then to translate. Sometimes they get in trouble for that. What can you do? You try as best you can, but in some places, especially harsh places, they might come after the fixer, the translator, and things like that. Is that crossing the line? Well, that person is an adult. That person said, yes, I'll work for this amount of money and to do this, but it might be putting them in danger. I've had times when I thought that, and I said, well, I can't do it. But other times you can do it without even thinking. What very often happens, and especially you see it, I've been a lot in the third world and developing countries, whatever you want to call them, where people were paid, journalists were paid to write certain things, and they would write them, and they were literally paid. It wasn't, they believed that anyway. Yes, that's crossing the line. That happens all the time. I think you have to take everything with a grain of salt as a journalist, but also as a reader. And so I wouldn't believe, when you listen to politicians, my rule of thumb is, I know they lie. I just don't know what part is a lie and what isn't. Well, that's what I have to find out. So yes, it happens, but I think most journalists are actually idealists who believe that there is something called the truth, more or less. And again, there's a gray zone exactly where that is. Nobody can prove as absolute truth. But I think most journalists do think, like Norma was saying, we're the last line for a democracy. That that is important. In fact, that's a part of when I was looking at the questions, one thing I thought of was nobody asked one of the most interesting questions, but Norma brought it up. What about the politicians who do want to get rid of democracy, and they will get rid of free speech? And you look at a place like Hungary, where they have found a way to undermine most democratic practices while keeping the veneer of democracy on things. And Viktor Orban even calls it illiberal democracy. But if you look at journalism in Hungary, most of the independent journalists have been shut up. Either they were pushed abroad, or their newspapers were actually bought by pro-government people. So almost all the printing that you see now in Hungary, a lot of it is by, quotes, private people, but it all sounds the same. You know, there might be a little bit more wiggle room than there was under the Soviets, but not that much. So with everything, you have to watch it. So yes, some people cross the line. Yes, sometimes you do it even inadvertently. That's part of the deal.
Okay. We're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to ask everyone to be a little bit brief on answers as we're trying to get some more questions asked. And so I'm going to go to Aoife. I think you had a question.
I have a question for Enrique, and it's, how do you keep things interesting when so much news is like repetitive and shared on so many different platforms? And where do you draw inspiration from?
It's a good question. How do you keep things interesting? Well, you know, like basically, as we are flooded with all kinds of news and facts and you know, my personal response to that is I turn into nature. So right now I'm taking pictures of birds, and I am trying to derive inspiration from nature. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge. It's the same challenge what Tom mentioned at the beginning, that is the artificial intelligence or the new technology allowed people who before were just constrained to a very boring tasks like doing the Wall Street closing numbers and that kind of thing, which is all now automatic. So yes, that person can now devote his or her efforts to something more interesting, and that is exactly the challenge. That is exactly the challenge. A lot of facts are readily available all over the place, and the challenge is to you know, somehow summarize and portray in an interesting way what's happening and explain what's happening. You know, I don't think there's a rule for that, but that has to be totally in your goals, you know, to try to state something that is not obvious, and it has to do with you know, your creativity and your really your ethical principles. That, to me, that is something that is totally one of the most important things.
We have a question from the audience that I want to make sure we have some time for, and it goes to Tom. And the question is that a lot of journalists are expressing fear that AI might eventually take over their jobs and render many jobless. And what's your take on this, and how you see the future of journalists with AI. You answered this a little bit in terms of that AI can actually help us. But do you think that with AI, it actually will free journalists up to do better work, or will it just take us over?
It will take away a lot of the drudge work, the donkey work that journalists have to do. It's amazing how much work is done by somebody at a much higher level than what is actually needed. Because if they are indisputable facts, like a sports score, those are probably automated too, all of that. That you can let that be automated. You can let a lot of economic things, for example, the quarterly results of a company, those come out now. They come out electronically, and they are slotted into a schema in Reuters and Bloomberg and the others, and put out within milliseconds. So, and that's fine. The person at the other end who's paying a lot of money for that is getting the information. So it just means we don't need to do that. What you can, that it also, like I said, it'll give a better amount of sources and all. It will depend on the owners of newspapers and whatever news organizations are, whether they then take the people and use them in another way, or whether they just cut staff. Unfortunately, cutting staff is very often the reaction that they have. But if you have, you'll get to a point where a machine can't do the work. The machine cannot wait and listen to a politician go on and then try to get what they really mean out of that. And then you write it you put a spin on it because you say, well, wait a minute, there's this context and that context. I doubt that a machine is going to be able to do that. So in the longer run, good journalism will come out. And a lot of everyday stuff, dross that has to be done, will be taken care of.
Just to build on that really quickly, I just wanted to say that I don't think AI is going to render us jobless, because we are human beings telling stories about human beings, and no machine can do that.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience, and I think that since we are kind of running out of time, I'm going to end on this. So I'm just going to go around to each of you and pose this one question, and see what, if you can kind of wrap up your thoughts with this. And it's that social media promotes information overload, and this has exacerbated people's shrinking attention span. Now, this leaves journalists with sensationalism if they're to grab any attention from readers. What approaches can journalists take to capture and maintain an audience interest without sacrificing depth and accuracy? It seems like it's the big challenge of our day right now. And so let's start with Norma. So the question is there's information overload, there's a tendency to sensationalism, and how do you kind of combat that?
I think to a certain degree, you sort of really can't combat it, because a lot of the current news model is based on that kind of engagement. So it's sort of like trying to find a balance between, okay, so we need to be journalists, we need to do journalism truthfully and properly, and sort of also make money at the same time. I do agree with the fact that a lot of it does become really sensationalized, but I think most major news outlets are still trying to figure out a way to balance those things. I don't have a blueprint for it, because if the stories don't sort of trend, and if they're not SEO friendly, like people are not going to read those stories, and so that information is not going to reach the people it needs to reach. So right now, I think it's a balancing act, and people are still trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Okay. And Enrique, and again, we've got about 4 minutes. So if you can.
Well, you know, I think it's totally key if you want to distinguish yourself and survive, is to produce things skillfully and make you know get the facts right, number one, and make them look interesting. You know, I've always been in a position where, you know, there's something going on and you have 50 photographers taking exactly the same picture in the same place, and there's always one or two at the most that have a much better picture than everybody else. Why is that? That's a skill that, you know, it's you have to develop that, and you have to develop that reputation, and sometimes you see a picture and say, oh, that picture is from so and so. I mean, that's you know, it's not one of the other 40 that were exactly in the same position. So
I guess that is the challenge then, is how to set yourself out from the crowd. Yeah. And Tom?
I think that media literacy is going to become more and more interesting and more important, both for the journalist who is writing for the medium and for the consumer who's looking at that news. What we have now is this 24/7 news cycle that we saw that with the hospital in Gaza, where immediately it was said, oh, it was an Israeli strike, and then later they said, no, it was a Palestinian strike, and nobody quite knew. But several organizations went out without question, oh, it's an Israeli strike. I remember watching it myself and noticing the difference that CNN was hedging its bets, BBC was going more or less on Israeli, and Al Jazeera, of course, was going 150% it's the Israelis. So we have to distinguish. In a way, we've done that with television. There are so many different television channels now, and most of them are just ignored. And a lot of the stuff that appears on social media and stuff like that, journalists should use it as a tip-off, but they shouldn't try to compete with it for their news stories, because very often it isn't even the first draft of history. It isn't even a draft. It's way before that. So I think we have to learn. Both sides have to learn more.
Okay. Great. I really appreciate all of your comments. This has been a terrific conversation. I really want to thank the students who have taken from all kinds of time zones, and they've taken their time out of your studies and your social life and your athletic lives and your family lives. So we want to definitely thank you guys for showing up and asking us such great questions. Thank you to our journalists who, again, have taken time out of their very busy schedules. And thank you to the audience. Without you, there would be no point in doing this. And hopefully you guys will tune in the next time we have one of our Decoder dialogues. And Maria?
Just to chime in one more time to say thank you all for attending tonight's Decoder Dialogue. As Marcy said, we aim to do these multiple times per year, so do make sure you're on our mailing list to know when the next one is coming up. And programs like this are made possible by our generous supporters all around the world. So thank you so very much. And if you'd like to learn more about News Decoder, get more involved and support us, please visit us at news-decoder.com, or there is a link in the chat to learn more about what we do and our campaign to continue the conversation about the future of journalism. So thank you all once more, and have a great day, a great evening, wherever you are.